Hello YouTube and welcome to this short video where we discover together practical use case of data science in the field. I am Frank van den Bergen, CEO of TIMI, and today we meet a renowned data scientist, Marie-Ange Levent. Hello Marie-Ange, how are you?
Hi Frank, I'm glad to be here.
So Marie-Ange, could you give us a little bit more information about your background? What are your specialties?
Yes, of course. So I studied data science more than 15 years ago and I had the opportunity to work on many innovative and large-scale projects. For example, in 2014 I was working on a predictive system for a large Belgian retailer to optimize advertising flyers.
Oh, that sounds like an interesting project, but is it worth spending so much energy to optimize some simple advertising flyers?
Yes, sure. So in fact, with my colleagues at the time, we were able to develop a system that multiplies by 9 the impact of the advertising flyers of this large retailer. So in other words, thanks to our optimized and personalized flyer, there are 9 times more people who visit the stores than with a standard all-box flyer. So it's important to know that in a retail sector, the margins are often so small that a successful flyer can sometimes by itself alone make all the difference between a good month that generates a lot of revenue and a barely profitable month. So there is a lot at stake when creating these flyers.
Okay, I see. So it's just a matter of creating 1 or 2 predictive models and we are good then.
Well, not really. So in fact, the computational load required to personalize each flyer is just big. It really involves a colossal amount of computation. So in 2014, doing that was really an incredible technical feat. But even now, even with the best and the most modern hardware that provides a lot of more computing power than in 2014, it's still a huge technical challenge. To give you an idea, every 2 weeks we were creating between 10 and 50 predictive models on gigabyte-sized training dataset. So in fact, almost 10 years later, this is still impossible to do with even the most modern open source machine learning tools because they are not able to digest training datasets that are larger than a few hundred megabytes. So another possibility would have been to do a very strong sampling, but that also leads to a very strong reduction of the revenue generated by the flyers because the personalization results are less accurate because of the sampling. So as a result, on this project, TIMI Modeler was a natural choice because it was the only tool capable of supporting such a large volumetry.
Wow, apparently the technical challenge doesn't scare you.
Well, yes, technically it was a very innovative project, but the purely technical aspect is usually not what I like best about data science. So what I really like is understanding the data to solve the most difficult business problems. In fact, I really have a result-oriented mindset. And sometimes to get to those results, you'll have to use very advanced techniques like machine learning with very advanced AutoML tools such as TIMI Modeler, while in some other situation, a good intelligent data preparation will do the job just as efficiently and you'll get a result that you can put into production much faster. So you could say what characterizes me is this problem solver aspect, and this is really applicable to many fields.
And Marie-Ange, have you had the opportunity to apply this result-oriented mindset in other areas as well?
Yes, of course I had. So for example, in the following year, in 2015, I was working in cybersecurity with just as much success. So at that time, I had to analyze hundreds of gigabytes of web connection logs to detect security flows for a worldwide electronic group that manufactures telecommunication devices. And I remember that the problematic linked to the very large volume of data was such that our client was really wondering what kind of huge hardware infrastructure we were using to be able to compute these huge joins that the project imposed. And actually at that time we only had a common grade server with Anatella on it.
So Marie-Ange, you have worked in retail and telecom. Are there any areas of data science that you still struggle with?
In fact, a big part of the pleasure of being a data scientist is that it's a job where you can work on a lot of diverse problems. For example, in a completely different field, I had the chance to work for the European Commission on a quite innovative text mining project. This project involved the classification of a text corpus of more than 100,000 documents in a dozen different languages. And this was really not trivial because we had to make predictive classification models on dataset with several tens of thousands of variables.
Yes, indeed, text mining projects often involve datasets with tens of thousands of variables, and it quickly becomes a headache to manage such a volume because there is no tools that can handle such large datasets, except Anatella, of course. In fact, with the exception of Anatella, all tools usually crash on this kind of volumetry. And as there is no suitable tool, projects of this kind are often quickly dropped. Actually, it's quite uncommon to be able to work on this kind of multilingual text classification project and bring it to completion.
Yeah, it's not trivial, but in the end, the project was worth because it had a strong impact. Indeed, after only 3 weeks of work, we were able to deliver results that would normally have been delivered only after 3 years by a team of 5 specialized lawyers working full-time and with a very high wage per hour. So imagine the budget savings. The European Commission officials were just happy.
Indeed, this data science project looks really impressive, Marie-Ange. So what is your approach when you start such a project?
I'd say that a good starting point is to have a good in-depth discussion with the client to fully understand their needs. In particular, I organize several sessions with people in the business to try to capture as much of their business experience as possible, because I know that it will help me greatly in the data preparation and analysis part thereafter. Then I collect as much data as possible and I choose the most appropriate tool to analyze this data. So for example, in the text mining project for the European Commission, we tested several OCRs to transform PDF images into text, and then we sent everything to Anatella to extract tens of thousands of variables out of the text with a bag of word box. Once I have the data restructured with a bag of word, all I have to do is to use Modeler to do the classification.
It's really funny that you are talking about the OCR thing. Indeed, I remember that back in 2016, there was no OCR included in Anatella. But we have now Tesseract that is directly included in Anatella for this kind of situation.
Wow, that's nice. Oh, I didn't know that. So it's true that Anatella is constantly evolving. Lately, Anatella has become my favorite tool to do all the data preparation tasks and thereafter all the necessary analysis.
So, Marie-Ange, I imagine that during all your many years of doing a lot of these very diverse data science projects, text mining, cybersecurity, optimization of flyers for cross-selling for supermarket chains, yes, you have been able to test many different analytical tools and solutions. So, what are your favorite solutions?
Lately, I don't think too much about which tool I'm going to use to start a project. In 2022, Anatella has become so versatile that I know that I can use it to do almost anything. Data collection, data preparation, and then all the necessary analysis thereafter. In fact, back in 2019, for a project involving GIS data, where you have to analyze cartographic data, Anatella was not optimal. But since the update this summer, even for that somewhat special type of GIS project, Anatella has now become a very good tool, perhaps even the best one. So whenever I need to start a new project, I just open Anatella and I'm good to go.
And what makes you prefer Anatella over the other solutions?
There are several elements that make Anatella indispensable when tackling a new analytical project. One of these elements, I think, is the ease and speed with which you can iterate to get to a first result quickly. And in addition to the ability to iterate easily, another element that I particularly like is that you can do almost everything directly without having to waste time typing lines of code. Personally, I really like this element, the elimination of code, but for some people it's quite counterintuitive to understand why, especially for young beginners in data science. They often find it hard to understand why a very experienced data scientist would want to avoid code.
Yes, I also noticed that beginners in the data science field have a hard time to understand that. When you have more experience, you arrive to the conclusion that you shouldn't spend so much time typing code. In fact, for me, it's more a question of mindset. A data scientist who has a result-oriented mindset will avoid to code to get the desired results faster.
Yes, and the speed aspect is also important. It's always fun to be able to quickly deliver the results that the stakeholders are looking for. They are happy and you quickly become their best friend. But when you set aside the speed aspect, there is also the fact that you get a result that is much more reliable. In fact, when you write code, you can never be 100% sure that your code is bug-free. And a small bug can change and completely corrupt all your results. So working with a low-code solution like Anatella, it allows you to have more confidence in the analytical result that you deliver. To summarize, I sleep better at night knowing that I gave the right insights.
Yes, I totally agree with you. In fact, I don't understand why there are so many beginner data scientists who absolutely want to type thousands of lines of incomprehensible code. On the one hand, I can understand that some of them take some pride in the intellectual challenge of writing all this code, but at the end it really goes against the interests of the final customer, the stakeholders, who just want results and not lines of code. For me, these data scientists don't have the right mindset, that is the result-oriented mindset.
Hey Frank, I think your perception about the young data scientists is a bit unfair. So I don't think they really think, well, I'm going to have fun typing 4,000 or 5,000 lines of code with complex lambda expressions, and that way I'll look really smart. And then too bad if the business has to wait for 3 months to get results that I could have obtained in 2 or 3 mouse clicks using a solution without code. No, actually, I don't think they think that way, and they're just exhibiting bad will. So I think that currently the data science trainings for young people are not so good. So they don't encourage people to have this result-oriented mindset. So usually the data scientists have to undergo many coding courses in barbaric languages such as SAS, R, or Scala. And in fact, there is nothing to do. Juniors are almost all forced to go through these steps to get their certification that will allow them to land their first job as a data scientist. So these young data scientists who just spend 3 months of their lives and sometimes more learning all these little intricacies of a programming language, they really have in mind that they have to type code. And when I tell them that typing thousands of lines of code is not a good idea, I often get a reaction of disbelief. So when they understand that myself, who is much more experienced than them in data science, I'm not particularly attached to code, quite the contrary, actually, they are sometimes a bit lost.
Yes, just like you, I'm not satisfied with current data science training in general. These training sessions, they don't create good, sharp and creative minds. Moreover, in the field of data science, you spend something like 80% of your time doing data preparation. And I have never seen a single data preparation course anywhere. It's just unbelievable. As for the code aspect, I totally agree with you again. In data science, if you can avoid to code, it's just better.
Yes, but also don't make me say what I didn't say neither. So for extremely precise problems, it may sometimes be necessary to do a small piece of really custom code, but 99% of the time, we will be busy doing standard data preparation work that can be done without any code thanks to a data manipulation tool such as Anatella. So the thing is that data science, and in particular data preparation work, consists of understanding your data well in order to transform it in the right way to be able to answer the business question you are asking yourself. And this business question evolves over time. It's not fixed. So you have to be careful to stay focused so that you don't lose your train of thought and continue to develop your reasoning to refine the question, the business question, more and more to obtain better results. And every time I start to focus on typing code, I lose my train of thought, and it takes me a long time to get my train of thought back to understand the data.
Yes, indeed, the brain has to do two complex things simultaneously. A complex reasoning around the data and another complex reasoning around the code. And doing both simultaneously is really not easy.
Yes, and to explain this difficulty here, let me give you a little analogy. It's a little bit like trying to drive a Formula One car and at the same time being asked to concentrate on solving the stoichiometric chemical equations to find the optimal concentration of oxygen and fuel to inject into your internal combustion engine to get the best possible power output. So you can concentrate on doing one of the two things well, either driving or being an expert in the chemistry of fuel combustion, but not both at the same time. So when you're driving a car, you're not really interested in what's going on inside your engine. You just want to reach your destination. Well, when I'm analyzing data during a data science project, it's the same thing. I don't want to spend energy on solving an interesting code problem neither. What I really want is to get the data clean and properly formatted to be able to answer the business problem that I'm facing. So actually, I digress a little bit, but it's still annoying to see that at the moment, data scientists are hired not for their ability to arrive to a good solution, but rather on their ability to write code, even if the code gives absurd results. So to me, the way of recruiting is just wrong. To use my car analogy from earlier, it's like if in order to win a Formula One race, you decide to put a chemist specialized in fuel combustion behind the wheel of your Formula One car, instead of a good driver like Verstappen or Hamilton. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, I totally agree with you. It's true that the way data scientists are currently recruited makes very little sense. It's not because you are able to write 3 lines of code that you will be able to do a good and clever data preparation or analysis. One has nothing to do with the other. But you have to put yourself in the shoes of these companies that want to hire data specialists to analyze their data. It's just easier to hire someone who has a few certifications in a trendy programming language than to find someone with a really result-oriented mindset.
Yeah. So to go back to the question, why Anatella or not something else? I would say that it's mainly because when I'm using Anatella, I can really focus on understanding the data and getting to a result. And another way to explain my experience with Anatella is that I have a limited amount of mental focus, or brain juice as I call it. And if I put all my brain juice into the code, there is not enough left to come up with a good data analysis to meet my quality requirements. So in fact, with Anatella, I can use almost 100% of my concentration, so of my brain juice, to understand the data and to arrive to a good result. In opposition, if I am forced to code during the analysis, I can only dedicate roughly like 30% of my brain juice to understand the data. So when I use Anatella, since there is no code, I have 3 times more brain juice at my disposal. It is as if I had suddenly a brain that works 3 times better. So in other words, Anatella acts as a cognitive amplifier.
Yes, I think that all Anatella users at one time or another are experiencing this cognitive amplification. And when I say all users, it's really all users. This cognitive amplification is something that is enjoyed by both the novice users and the very experienced coders. In fact, they all describe the same phenomenon using different words, but it's basically the same thing always. It's this cognitive amplification phenomenon that is so particular to Anatella.
Yeah, and it's something very important to me. Frankly, from my point of view, I don't understand how one could do without Anatella when working with data. For me, it's almost a mandatory tool to get to a valid analytical result.
Wow, that's a particularly nice description of Anatella. Thanks, Marie-Ange, that's really cool. And also, I like it when you explain that Anatella is a cognitive amplifier. I think that I'm going to use that term again. Apart from that, your experience overlaps well with mine, in the sense that me too, as a data scientist with more than 20 years of experience behind me, I think that the right approach to correctly solve a data problem goes through a code-free approach. because it allows you to really focus on the data. Personally, I'm very comfortable with code because I've been doing code in C and other languages for over 40 years now. But I am still convinced that a no-code approach is far superior in data science. In fact, for me, a good data scientist is, above all, a curious person who wants to dig into his data to extract all the knowledge and value out of it. And I have personally noticed that this curious person is often not found among coders, but rather in what is commonly called in companies the business people. As a result, we created Timmy as a tool that is really designed to allow business users to really mine their data efficiently without having to code. Because there is no way around it. This code, it really blocks your train of thought when you try to understand your data. In fact, you should know that the M in Timmy, it stands for mining. So, in summary, for the data workers who really wants to get their hands dirty, Anatella is a great tool. Now, Marie-Ange, with your age and your great experience, your role has evolved more into a managerial position of a team of data scientists. In this new role of manager, does Anatella still bring you something valuable?
Yes, of course. So I've been lucky enough to lead a small team of data scientists on some of my projects, although I still prefer a more hands-on position. And I must say that when I had to review a complex data transformation to validate it, then I particularly appreciate the visual and intuitive aspect of Anatella. In fact, as a manager of a data science team, I find Anatella to be a very valuable tool because understanding a code of several thousand lines that is completely twisted or written by a junior data scientist is an experience I would not wish to anyone. But on the other hand, validating an Anatella graph is quite easy.
Yes, indeed. So I think you come here today to present a pretty cool little data transformation. Could you tell us more about it?
Yes, sure. So I wanted to talk about a small use case that I had the opportunity to deploy in several banks. Typically, we use such a graph to do data cleaning when merging data from two bank branches. So now let's imagine that we have a customer under the identifier customer A here. The same customer is also encoded in the same branch X under the identifier B. So this is a duplicate. Unfortunately, no one has realized that customer A and B are actually the same person. To add a little bit of spice to the sauce, we will also make the assumption that the same customer is encoded a third time in another agency. Why? Under the identifier C. So thanks to this fuzzy join box of Anatella, we detect that customer A is actually the same as B, and customer B is the same as C. So at this stage of Anatella graph, we have not yet realized that A, B, and C were the same client encoded 3 times. So on the other hand, we can apply a transitivity principle as it is illustrated here. So if we know that A equal to B and B equal to C, then necessarily the client A, B, and C are the same person. So here is a representation of all our data in the form of a small chart. In this chart, the nodes are the customer. And we see that client A, B, and C are here. So the arcs represent the equalities that we discovered using the fuzzy join box. For example, the fuzzy join box tells us that the client A and B are equal and represent the same person. And we see 3 different groups of nodes appear. In fact, each group of nodes represents the same person. And for example, this group here with the client A, B, and C, actually it represents only one person. And that's exactly what this new box named Find Connected Groups will compute. So more precisely, this box gives a unique identifier to each group of nodes. For example, here we have a column that is appropriately called group. And this group column allows us to see that client A, B, and C are actually the same person because they are in the same group. So it's cool, isn't it? So the rest of the data transformation consists in creating little Excel files that will be sent to each agency to tell them to correct their duplicate. Everything is done automatically. So Anatella generates lots of different Excel files and one file per agency. And so those same files will contain the precise description of all the duplicates that are found in the agency. Then Anatella sends the same file to all of the agencies concerned. Each email is personalized for each agency to be sure to respect the GDPR law regarding the confidentiality of the data from the European citizens. So for example, only the agency that manages the client B can receive information about the same client B. So I wanted to show this little example because I think it's pretty cool. It actually shows a lot of different things, only using a dozen of boxes, such as the fuzzy joins, a little bit of SNA, so the social network analysis, and some email automation features.
Yes, indeed. It's a very nice example. So a big thank you, Marie-Ange, for sharing with us your knowledge, and I hope to see you soon for a new episode. I'm sure we'll find more topics around data science that we can talk about together.
Yes, of course, Frank, and see you soon. Thank you for the invitation.